whether they involve ghosts or just scary people. What's your favorite scary true stories? Ghosts, murders, weird unexplained deaths. Anything weird, wacky or scary that you know for a fact is true.
I went to a private boarding school in Western Europe. An old mansion in the woods, which used to be from a colonial aristocrat family who earned their fortune with the spice trade in the Far East. In the Second World War the Germans used it as a headquarters, and permitted the barones to keep living on the top floor. We would always hear weird sounds and footsteps in the hallways at midnight, a few times even doors slamming. It was quite spooky. One day a school companion discovered a hidden door in the built-in closet of his room. When we opened it was really dark and a musty odor was coming out. We entered with flashlights and discovered a hidden small appartement inside. With household attributes, furniture, toys, food items and cigarettes all from the 1940s. It was really an adventure for small 15-year-old boys like us. Later we found out that the barones hid a Jewish family in her mansion, and while the Germans moved their headquarters in the bottom 2 floors, the barones kept the top floor and the Jewish family could not escape. They sat throughout the Second World War in hiding right above the German headquarters in the secret apartment. Growing up, my family was dirt poor. I had to wear glasses, and even as a kid in 3rd grade I knew they were something out of our budget, so I always tried to take really good care of them. I was playing and they flew off, and when I inspected them there was a huge chip missing out of them. I remember pressing my finger into it and feeling the giant piece missing. What really sucked is it was right in the middle of the lens, so it was literally an eyesore. I remember going to my room and just staying there, not wanting to tell my mom because I knew it would be a financial burden. I cried myself to sleep and prayed. We were not a religious family. When I woke up, the first thing I did was grab my glasses. They were fine. Not a mark on them. It freaked me the hell out even as a kid, and put a little bit of the fear of God in me. I have probably spent more time thinking about this than any other thing in my life. Okay, so when I was 20 I went traveling for 6 months. The last leg of my tour before going home was a few weeks at a hostel in Los Angeles. I didn't want to stop traveling, and the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie had just come out and I was obsessed, so when I met the sailor dude at the hostel we started spending a lot of time together. He was Australian, and said his current job was to sail from LA to Australia to deliver a boat to some rich guy. There was another guy with him, and 2 women, but he said he needed one more person to complete the trip and invited me. Even though I had no experience. He said I'd learn as we went, and get paid a decent chunk of change at the end, and he'd pay for my room and board and plane ticket home at the end. So, plucky young adventurer girl that I was like, hells yeah buddy. So we were supposed to set sail in about a week, and I started spending most of my time with this crew. The 2 guys were really pushy, but I noticed the 2 girls were really shy. They never really talked to anyone, just sort of tagged along everywhere like shadows. They were both young women like me, but whenever I tried to connect with them one of the guys would interrupt and say they don't like to talk, then change the subject. At one point the captain guy noticed that I carried a little pocket knife and got kind of intense, grilling me about it. Did I carry it for self-defense? Did I think I could and would use it if I was threatened? Would I fight if someone tried to attack me? I tried to shrug off his questioning, but he wouldn't stop pushing it until I finally sort of awkwardly laughed and said I didn't think I could ever actually hurt anyone. A bold-faced lie, I will kill a mother F. So I was starting to get some red flags. I mentioned this at one point, just a little offhand joke about, well, haha, how do I know you're not going to steal my kidney and leave me for dead? And in response the captain dragged me to his room to show me all the high-tech boat equipment he had in there. He was like, see? Proof we're actually who we say we are. Why would we have all this boat stuff if we aren't going to boat? Which I secretly thought didn't prove anything about my safety, but I smiled and agreed and nodded anyway. So the next morning, still a few days before we were supposed to leave, the captain woke me up at 6 a.m. He told me plans had changed and we had to leave right then. I had to get up and pack my stuff. Hurry, hurry, hurry. One of those other FINGBs ran away last night and we had to go now. So that was the final red flag, and I was like, you know, I think I want to see my family. Thanks, but never mind, I'ma go home. And he huffed and puffed and told me I was making a huge mistake, but my hostel room had 5 other people in it, most of whom were waking up from all the noise he was making. I am pretty sure that's the only thing that saved me from him just grabbing me and running. After some back and forth, we agreed that I would go home and see my family for a week, then he'd fly me out to meet up with them at a supply stop in Mexico. After that I was on high alert, but didn't see him or any of his crew for the rest of my stay. I mostly stuck to the hostel, and tried to stay in well-populated areas that I knew were in sight of security cameras. I went home, and after a couple days called this guy under the pretense of arranging my flight to meet him, but really to try and feel out if he still seemed sketchy AF or if I was just being paranoid. He told me I'd have to meet him at a tiny landlocked town in Mexico. While he'd said before he'd pay for my plane ticket there, suddenly I'd have to pay for it. But he promised it would be worth it. He kept offering me more and more money, to be paid once we got to Australia. He started telling me truly ludicrous numbers. I declined. He called me some not very nice names. After that I never heard from him again. I'm about 80% sure I narrowly escaped human trafficking. When I was 15, my grandparents were on a cruise to Greece and the Mediterranean. When they took trips, a few nights before they left we'd go over there for dinner and they would give us research assignments so that when they came back, we would give them a full report about the history and locations of where they had been. This was in the 1980s, so no internet, library all the way. 3 nights after they left, I had a dream that Grandpa was in my room, woke me up, and was rubbing my back. Not as creepy as it sounds, it was a holdover calming thing he did when I was a baby/toddler with lots of respiratory problems. He told me he loved me, that he would always be looking over me, that he was going to make sure I made it through. He said, I have to go now, some cake, remember I'll be here no matter what. I asked him to stay, he said he couldn't. I woke up to my mom shaking me. She was hysterical. My dad was in the living room. My parents were divorced. This is the only time he was ever in my mom's house. My sister was crying. My dad was distraught. I said, matter-of-factly, Grandpa's dead. They all looked at me like I was insane. Mom asked how I knew. I said he told me. To this day, my family doesn't believe my dream and swear I imagined it all. But how would a 15-year-old just know her beloved grandpa was dead half a world away? Wow. When my own grandfather died, he didn't visit a member of our family in a dream. However, a supposedly psychic friend of my mother who had helped him out a few times came over to ask if he was okay, because he'd appeared to her in a dream telling her to let us know he was fine. He'd died earlier that evening. There is no plausible way she could have found out. I suppose it's not 100% impossible, but if I was going to lean towards any one non-supernatural explanation, I would go for coincidence rather than a hoax. Several years ago, my grandmother passed away after a pretty lengthy illness. My grandparents lived in a pretty small town and my grandfather was a retired minister, so most of their social life revolved around their church. I had been there lots of times as a child, but the church had recently been completely renovated. So at my grandmother's funeral, it was basically the first time I had been in this church and new sanctuary. 15 months later, my grandfather remarried a widow he had known from church. So the second time I was in the sanctuary was for the wedding. As soon as I got inside the church, I kept thinking about my grandmother. That in and of itself wasn't that strange, after all the last time I had been in this building was for her funeral. Plus I look a lot like my grandmother, so before the wedding started, several of my grandparents' friends who stopped to say hello commented on how much I looked like her. The service started and the pastor performing the ceremony said my grandmother's name instead of the bride's. Oops. He corrected himself immediately and went on. Then I picked up the hymnal in front of me to open it to the hymn we were about to sing. A piece of paper fell out, so I bent over to pick it up. It was a bulletin from my grandmother's funeral. I elbowed my husband next to me and showed him, his eyes nearly bugged out of his head. I kind of loved it, though. My grandmother was a very feisty woman before she was sick, so I think it was her way of letting me know she was still around. Smiley face. My little brother's best friend is a dead guy. Not in the usual "oh, the child talks to ghosts" when it's an imaginary friend. This dude is real and it scares the shit out of my family. My brother also has a weird knowledge of the past that 6-year-olds just shouldn't know. From here on my brother is Boo Boo. It's his little kid nickname. There's also Adam, aged 11, and Tay, aged 3. A little more background is my mom's house is a 100-year-old ex-convent, nun house, not criminal. The family that owned it after the church sold it was the Belews. Well-known family in my small town. We've found lots of history on them while researching Boo Boo's friend. None of this is shared with or around him, he just confirms it either before or after we find out. So, Boo Boo has always been a bit off. As an infant in our poltergeist-style haunted house, he couldn't be left alone. Even for a minute. He was very nervous and had to be held constantly. You couldn't even go to the bathroom without him. I'll leave the story of that house for a comment on this. But the next house we lived in he had a 100% personality change. Easygoing happy baby into toddler. The next house we lived in was the convent. My family noticed some funny things, but nothing drastic. It was mostly energies, an angry mother superior in my room, or shadows, a woman in a habit going up the stairs, or smells. On Sundays and Wednesdays at Mass, you can smell the incense in the living room, or sounds, women singing hymns in what was originally the dormitory. Other than the angry nun, they were either neutral or really pleasant. We didn't mind living alongside the past. But the past got a little nasty after Tay, the youngest, was born. Boo Boo started talking about Pookman. Pookman was mean. He'd push him, knock his toys over, and say mean words. We mostly took it as a scapegoat imaginary friend. We got more concerned as he got older and more detail came out about Pookman. He had yuck on his leg and bits of metal in it. His brain was broken and that's why he's mean. He got hurt on a boat and that's why he came home. We brushed it off as he must have caught something on TV he shouldn't have seen. At some point Forrest joins the game. He's like Pookman, but nice. Boo Boo would get so mad at us sometimes, saying Forrest is talking to you. We'd have to remind him we couldn't see Forrest, only he could. So he would relay what Forrest said. Most of the time it was innocent. Forrest wants to know what's for dinner. Other times it was a bit confusing. Forrest wants to know why they moved the house. In the 90s the house was picked up and moved 5 blocks to its current location, or Forrest told me what toys you hid in the closet. Or he would talk about things that happened when he wasn't home. He'd also have whole conversations with Forrest, alone in his room with no audience. He often told Forrest to be quiet or go away, he's too busy. Over the years Forrest became fleshed out into a fully person. He was tall like Daddy and had lots of hair, unlike his bald father. He didn't have a daddy. He worked at a gas station and fixed cars and wore a shirt connected to his pants. He went away and came back cause his brain got hurt. His last name is Blue. Boo Boo could also point out different places of note around town that pertained to Forrest. Over there was the house he lived in until he got sick, an empty lot. That's where he worked, a new storefront downtown. That's where he lived, the old location of the convent. Then things started to add up when my mom started researching the history of the house. The originally Baloo couple had a daughter. She had a son, born a bastard, named Forrest. She got married and had a child when Forrest was about 7. From what we can gather, the new husband didn't like Forrest. He was left with his grandparents while his mother, stepfather, and new brother moved into their own home. It could explain why Forrest only really manifested after Tay was born. His mother abandoned him with a baby, so he didn't like babies. The location downtown was originally a garage owned by the family with an illegal gas pump out front. I found this in an old newspaper about the battle to get it taken down. Very small town, not a lot goes on. That would explain the coveralls. After he graduated high school, he joined the Navy and went off to the war. We found his conscription card. He was honorably discharged after the ship he was on was attacked and he took shrapnel to the leg in an explosion. A talk with a member of the family, original Forrest's great-niece, revealed that Uncle Forrest was prone to acts of unprovoked anger as a result of a war-era head injury. Blue sounds a lot like Baloo to a toddler learning his colors. He died from an illness in an assisted living building that burned down before we moved to town, the empty lot. The storefront was the original location of the garage. My mom also received several family pictures and old pictures of the house from the great-niece she got in touch with during her research. She'd saved one, a picture of Forrest in his naval uniform, to her phone to send to me. She never showed it to Boo Boo. We never talked about it around him. All conversation was done over text and he couldn't read. One day he's scrolling through her phone looking at pictures of him and our brothers. He liked to list off everyone as he came to them. That's Mommy, that's me, there's Tay. Just nonchalant as he flips through. He gets to the one of original Forrest and without skipping a beat says, "Oh. It's you, Forrest." And keeps swiping. My mom about shit a brick and deleted the picture. But that's Boo Boo and his dead best friend. He still talks to Forrest. I don't think he'll ever stop, to be honest. Pookman is gone though. He vanished when the suicide shack, a man hung himself in the little one-room shack, on the lot across the alley was torn down. We think once that negative energy was gone he had less to feed off of. So there's that at least.